This is the BD795M micro ATX motherboard that comes with a built-in 7945HX 16-core Ryzen processor. It's a desktop motherboard, but it's a mobile processor. This is one of the most inexpensive ways to get some really kind of awesome performance. It costs less than a 16-core AMD processor, even the 7000 series. And I want to talk about how the idea behind this could change the industry. Might change DIY PCs, could change things a little bit forever. This is also not the first motherboard we've looked at like this from MinisForum. You should check out our other videos, including the 7000 series. 7000 series has been out for a while, so MinisForum has new lower pricing on this motherboard and several of the other motherboards that we have reviewed in the past. In fact, you should keep an eye on the forum because we're going to be doing some giveaways for forum members on stuff that I'm not using or that I haven't given away to an open source developer. So because this CPU is designed for mobile, it doesn't really have a lot of the overclock features. You're not going to be able to run DDR5 6000. Well, okay, I mean, you shouldn't expect to be able to run DDR5 6000. You shouldn't expect a lot of stuff. You get the motherboard. You get a quick, handy installation guide. QR code you can scan. You get an I/O backplate, one SATA cable, some Wi-Fi antenna adapters should you elect to buy an M.2 Wi-Fi. Ooh, another SATA cable. A total of 2 in different bags. That's weird. So you can pick up your own M.2 Wi-Fi, although you should really check the compatibility list because not every M.2 Wi-Fi is going to work on this board. It also uses SODIMM instead of regular desktop memory, but look, it's like a pregnant ITX port. And don't worry, MinisForum does actually make an ITX version of this. So if you're doing an ITX build like we have done in the Fractal Terra and some of the other like high-end awesome cases, that is a great way to build a small form factor machine that doesn't get hot because the mobile CPU. And AMD's really figured out their power efficiency. So for single thread performance and lightly threaded performance, there's really not a huge performance difference between a 7000 series mobile CPU and a 7000 series desktop CPU. And that's part of why I think that this has the potential to change the industry, which we will talk about, or maybe a slow change is coming. If we look at the motherboard layout here, it is very, very, very simple. We got our single 8-pin power, 3 4-pin fan headers at the top, 2 4-pin fan headers at the bottom, front panel audio, USB 2, and then our front panel control, 2 SATA connectors, our 24-pin power, and then we've got our 20-pin front panel 5 gigabit. There's also 2 2280 M.2. One of those is directly to the CPU. And then we've got our expansion slot. Now, the cooling solution here, because it's a mobile CPU, they had to get creative. There's a heat spreader pad thingy. And this is LGA 1700. It's an LGA 1700 layout. You can use an inexpensive LGA 1700 cooler that can deal with, size it for about 100, 150 watts, something like that. And just about every AIO water cooler, if you want to do that, will be compatible with this. But again, that's why this works great for a small form factor build because it's not going to generate a ton of heat. As a rear I/O, there's not a lot. You've got HDMI DisplayPort out, 2 5 gigabit USB, 2 USB 2.0, 2.5 gig LAN, and then our 5.1 audio solution. So as we think about our build here, motherboard and processor together as a unit, it doesn't have a lot of USB ports, it doesn't have a lot of SATA ports, it doesn't have a lot of really anything, but 16 cores and the performance is there. You can add a graphics card, you can add a reasonable PCIe Gen 4 M.2 to it, and you're basically set. Although you really should use an M.2 that has a built-in heatsink. This motherboard doesn't have a heatsink. If you think about the budget for those components versus, say, something like B650 Pro RS, this is one of the more affordable AM5 motherboards. And being affordable, it also has some trade-offs. But in terms of the USB and the rear I/O, double the connectivity. A very similar layout, but double the connectivity. Very similar audio. This one has USB-C. There's no USB-C to speak of on this platform. But what are you going to pair with this? A 16-core processor immediately, just by itself, blows your budget. You get an 8-core processor? Maybe discount used 12-core processor? It can make sense if you need some of the extra connectivity and features, but if you're on a budget and you're not going to get the absolute highest end graphics card, this will have better performance and be 16 cores. And that's what I worry might change the industry. As we get higher and higher quality boards like this, and given what AMD has been able to do with laptop CPUs, I mean, if you look at Zen 5 and Zen 5C and how power efficient they are, I think that lower end desktop boards ultimately get merged in with repurposed mobile CPUs. There's always going to be a place for higher-ish end desktop, 12, 16 cores, more power, fully unlocked, but being able to repurpose mobile CPUs at the low end eliminates entire product lines. I think it's an inevitability just for cost reasons. Now for the GPU we're going to be using is Steel Legend B580. It's an Intel Arc GPU, and that is because these GPUs have the best bang for the buck if you're not doing 4K gaming. If you're content doing 1080p and a little bit of 1440p with like medium high settings, these cards are a pretty good deal. If you want something a little bit more high end, you can sometimes find 7900 XT, 7900 GRE, or 7900 XTX on sale, well below MSRP. It is a much higher end card. It is very close to performance in a 4090 and non-ray tracing scenarios. And well, the 7900 XTX is, and you'll be happy. You step down a little bit for the GRE and the XT, but those are solid cards. You can check out our reviews on those. Those are sort of the sweet spots right now in terms of the performance per dollar. And just to be explicitly clear, I don't think it makes sense to pair this platform with the absolute top highest end of GPU. You're really pushing your luck with the 7900 XTX even, because you can run into some scenarios where this 16 core processor will bottleneck a little bit, but mostly it's okay. So like 7900 XT and below, pretty safe. GRE, well, 7900 GRE and below is probably pretty safe. I'm excited to report for the BIOS tour that there's a lot of options here, including bifurcation. So you'll be able to run X4, 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 or if you've got one of the Arc GPUs that's got two M.2 because it only uses 8 lanes, you'll be able to use the 2 M.2 on your Arc, but you'll have to set the bifurcation option. So you could run 4 M.2 off of this. It's also really good for home lab because the 7000 series CPUs is the last generation I think we're going to have where all the cores are the same for mobile, because Zen 5000 you have some of the efficiency cores and some of the performance cores, and the cores are the same microarchitecture and they're the same. It's not like Intel's solution. It's a cleaner solution from the point of view of software. It's just that the efficiency cores won't clock as high on Zen 5, but this is Zen 4. And so you've got 16 identical like cores on 2 CCDs, and so if you're going to use this for a home lab, this is really amazing. And we have a lot of videos on the channel about turning something like this into a home lab. And you may think it doesn't have enough memory or it doesn't have enough SATA, but you do have those M.2. You can break those M.2 out into 10 gigabit Ethernet, 5, 6 more SATA ports, whatever you need for your home lab configuration. Now the out-of-the-box default memory training has a little disappointing 120 nanoseconds memory latency as reported by Ada64, but because AMD CBS and PBS are unlocked in BIOS, you can hop in there and set the DDR timings yourself. It should work and should be pretty stable at DDR5 5600. I changed the timing to DDR5 5600 and that got me below 100 nanoseconds for memory. This is also something that would be a little different. If you were going to go the desktop CPU route, of course this is going to be more well put together. You could get, 75 nanoseconds is pretty attainable on the AM5 platform with a good DDR5 kit of memory. The other thing is, now it might be clear why I'm using this potato class cooler, because this is a mobile CPU. The way that it does thermals and throttling is a little different than a desktop CPU. In Hardware Info 64, it reports a somewhat alarming 95 degrees C, and yet in Hardware Info 64, it reports that there's been no thermal throttling or no untoward things happening because the CPU is running a little warm. I would like to see about maybe improving the thermal situation, try it with a better cooler, see if I get a little bit more performance, but as it is, this reported CPU-Z single thread is a score over 700. Keep in mind, modern desktop processors are like 900 or better, so single thread performance is not quite as good as the high clocks on an expensive higher end desktop class CPU, but this is certainly plenty fast enough that it's not going to bottleneck our B580 Arc GPU. And in testing, that shows to be true. The B580 offloads a lot of computation to the driver, and so more than many GPUs, it does make a little bit of a difference how good your CPU actually is, because the Arc GPU is leaning heavily on the CPU to do its stuff. So if you have an older CPU, as we said in our Arc review, it can be a little slower than it is with a faster CPU. That's a little bit true here, but you lose about 3% max in our testing. Most games are around 1.5 to 2%, give or take, versus a 9800X 3D. So there you go. The BD795M could be a good platform for a desktop computer that's 16 cores, and in my case 64 gigs of memory. This is a pretty respectable little system. In terms of power consumption, our kilowatt reports a maximum of 118 watts, so we are running the 7945 at around 100 watts, give or take. But that's been a quick look at the BD795M, and this is so good in terms of like the compute. Like if you look at the diagram of how good it is in terms of compute, what kind of GPUs can I pair with this, how much do I need to spend on a cooler, you know, what do I need to do with the RAM, and you look at what you're trying to accomplish with your build, you're putting all of your points into compute and PCIe connectivity, basically. There's nothing else. You can see by looking at the motherboard, there's nothing else. And there's nothing else even on the lowest end desktop class motherboards. All those desktop class motherboards have way more features, USB-C, way more USB ports in general, a better overclockability, a better, more put together BIOS, tons and tons of options, and the CPUs will cost more, and because of that level of complexity in those options, it drives the cost up. And so if you're really, really pinching your pennies, then this can be an option. And this can be a viable option in terms of more compute per unit dollar. But there are significant trade-offs. But this is really cool. I'm going to have a couple more MinisForum motherboards that we're going to take a look at. And like I say, be sure to watch the forum for those giveaways coming up. Not just MinisForum, but also some other stuff too. Just trying to unload some crap we got in the office. That's you know, older video stuff that has been replaced by newer stuff. I don't know. I'm Wendell. I'm signing out. You can find me in the Level 1 forum.